All right. Welcome again to the Memory Cafe breakout room for this dementia-friendly neighborhood community conference. And here we go with letting you know that a Memory Cafe offers social connection to people with memory loss and their families through simple, regularly occurring social meetups in comfortable settings such as libraries, senior centers, faith communities, and restaurants. In this session, learn about the benefits of this model and the easy action steps to launch one in your community, and enjoy a spotlight on a bilingual Spanish-English memory cafe in San Antonio. Our speakers today are Beth Soltzberg, the founding director of Jewish Family and Community Service Memory Cafe Percolator, and also JoAnn Sharman, who's a community health nurse, part of Caring for the Caregiver. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give you a fuller introduction for our first speaker, Beth Soltzberg. Beth directs the Alzheimer's-related dementias family support program at Jewish Family and Children's Services in Waltham, Massachusetts. Beth facilitates the JF and CS Memory Cafe and a support group for adults whose parents live with dementia. She founded and coordinates the Memory Cafe Percolator, and an international resource for those starting and sustaining memory cafes. She also leads the Dementia Friends Public Awareness Program for Massachusetts and is part of the statewide leadership team promoting dementia-friendly community initiatives. Yay, Beth! We're so thrilled that you're here with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and pop a spotlight on you so everybody can see you through your whole time of sharing with us. And with that, take it away.
Thanks so much, Heather. It's wonderful to see everybody. As Heather mentioned, I'm on the opposite coast. I'm in the Boston area, but I was coached by a friend to say, "Go Huskies." So I hope that's right. Okay, good. It's really a delight to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing JoAnn as well, who will be talking with you about the bilingual cafe that she runs in San Antonio. So I'm going to bring up my slides, and my role is to give an overview of memory cafes, kind of what they are, and then sort of a walk through some of the operational issues that people often confront when they're starting or sustaining a cafe. I will first show you a 1-minute intro video that we produced in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and that's available for any cafes to use as part of your effort to get the word out to potential donors, participants, volunteers, your broader community. Then I'm going to go through some of these memory cafe nuts and bolts and some resources. And I do just want to right up front give you the URL to the Percolator, which you see on the screen. So it's jfcsboston.org/percolator. The Percolator has been in existence for almost 10 years now. This March will be our 10th anniversary, and it's a free resource clearinghouse for people running memory cafes. And so if you go to that website, you will find the place to click to download our free toolkit on starting a cafe, running a cafe either in person, virtual, or hybrid. We have that toolkit in English and Spanish. And a whole host of other resources. And you can join our email list and our Google group as well. So I use this as the metaphor for my role. It's a colander, and that's how I see myself, is that I'm in the lucky position that I get to hear what memory cafe people all around the country and beyond are doing. And I just try to filter out the bits that are useful for everybody and package them in a way that you can all use them. I'm sure there are folks here with us today who are running cafes or connected with them in some ways and have done a lot of thinking about this, or you may be involved with programs that are sort of cousins to memory cafes, and I hope during the Q&A we can all share. So I'm going to start by showing this video, and I'm actually going to just reshare because I think I forgot to share my sound. Oh, there we go. So this video will just give you a quick look at memory cafes in action.
It can be lonely living with memory loss or dementia. But you are not alone. Memory cafes are bringing people affected by dementia together at welcoming social events.
It's fun. I am so thankful to have a place where my mom and I can go and laugh and just enjoy the experience.
I've made new friends. They understand what I'm going through because they are living it too.
Memory cafes encourage me to try different activities, which is really refreshing.
You'll find guest artists, musicians and dancers, educational programs, or simply a place to relax and chat with others. These gatherings are free, and you can attend as many as you would like. Cafes are offered weekly or monthly, with options to meet in person, online, or even by telephone. Visit these websites to learn more and find a memory cafe near you.
So that is our effort to give people a way to actually see a cafe, because we know that most people don't know what they are. And we are overcoming this barrier of silence around dementia in general, and then also this challenge that a cafe is not a familiar thing to many members of the public. So having a way for people to actually see one in action is often helpful in generating participation. I just want to underscore some of the elements that you saw in that video. So that the focus is social connection. And cafes are for people living with dementia and their care partners. And that can include family members, friends, professional care providers if they have one. They are for people with dementia due to any medical cause. And most cafes are for people at any stage of disease progression. A core principle of cafes is that we don't ask people what their diagnosis is. We're really stepping away from the medical model. And we want cafes to be accessible to people who haven't been diagnosed and people who don't relate to their diagnosis, don't want to hear about it, and people who aren't aware of it. We want this to be a place that anyone can come and feel welcome. And then they're tailored to local language, community interests and needs. So every cafe should look different because it really should be about that local community. So I've said all this, and I also just want to say no one owns the concept. There's no copyright on it. So there are cafes that vary in some ways. There are cafes that focus on people at early stage dementia. There are cafes that are more focused on care partners or more focused on people living with dementia as opposed to the duo. So, you know, the idea is free and available for adaptation to the needs of the local community. Just to give you a snapshot of where they come from, this gentleman that you see in the photo, Bear Meesen, started the first Alzheimer's Cafe in Leiden, Holland. If anybody here speaks Dutch, maybe you can help me pronounce his name properly. I'm sure I've got it wrong. But he's a geriatric psychologist, and you see in neon behind him is the sign that says Alzheimer's Cafe. Cafes spread throughout much of Europe and Australia, and in many countries, the model is more focused on education, and there can even be some diagnostic process that begins. Often there's a public health nurse who would participate. And in the US, they've really been more social, more focused on sort of leaving the disease at the door and trying to reduce social isolation. And the first cafes started in 2008 in Santa Fe and in Minnesota. So our toolkit focuses on these 10 aspects of running a cafe. And over the years of doing lots of trainings, I've found these are the areas that there are most questions about. Naming your cafe, location and setting, when to meet, participants, outreach, volunteers, activities, financial sustainability, how to really engage people living with dementia more as leaders, and feedback and program improvement. So I'm going to take you on a sort of a lightning fast tour of these topics and then wrap up soon enough that you can hear from JoAnn, and then during Q&A, we can really hone in on what it is that you have particular questions about. And I would definitely encourage you to go to the Percolator webpage and download the free toolkit, and then you'll get much more detail on all of these. So what's in a name? There are lots of different cafe names out there, and you see a bunch of them in the bubble. Basically, you want to communicate welcome, fun. I think the term cafe itself is really an important part of why memory cafes have spread, because when you think of cafe, you think of something enjoyable and hospitable, and you don't think of something medical, and people need a break from medical and they need to have joy. In a name, you can convey something about the culture of the people you're serving. You can convey some information about what happens there. I do want to address this issue of the term Alzheimer's Cafe as opposed to Memory Cafe. The very first one was called Alzheimer's Cafe, and in some localities, that term is used. Again, you get to pick. I will say that there are a couple challenges with that. One is not everybody has Alzheimer's. People may have dementia due to Parkinson's or FTD or vascular or traumatic brain injury. Any number of conditions may bring them to the cafe. And so memory is more inclusive. Also, it's less triggering for people who are very, very upset about the diagnostic label. There are people who find the term memory cafe off-putting as well. So I know a number of cafes that sort of have that as a subtitle. Just looking at the list here, Alice's Cafe, and then in small print, a memory cafe. Location is going to be your first decision probably, and cafes meet in so many settings. Senior center is probably not surprising, and it's a good place, except not always for people with younger onset dementia. They may not think of that as their place so much. Libraries are really common settings, and they are so wonderful, inclusive for all ages. Community centers, day programs, I will say, are challenging as are long-term care residences, just because people don't always want to go to those settings for a community-based program. And if sometimes residences really kind of want to use a cafe for marketing purposes to kind of bring people into the building, and people can feel that, and that doesn't work well. So it's wonderful when those businesses want to support cafes, and what they often do is partner with a community setting and sort of co-sponsor. Houses of worship, town hall, park and rec facility. Heather mentioned she runs a cafe at the Y. It's fantastic. Restaurants, coffee shops, museums, nature centers, outdoor settings. We had one that was run in a bowling alley for quite a while in Boston. Really the sky is the limit. Now some cafes meet virtually. Many have pivoted to virtual and then gone back to in-person. I will say what we discovered in my cafe, but this is true for many, is that once we were established meeting on Zoom, we found that there were a group of participants who did better meeting that way. And these are folks who have transportation or mobility barriers. We also have this wonderful thing sometimes where family members who are out of state will actually meet up at the cafe. And for some of our participants, being able to be in their home and kind of have their stuff that they can hold on to is really helpful. Then there's other folks who really are disengaged by a virtual meeting, or they don't have the technology. So it's like a Venn diagram where we have in the middle people who could do either, and then on either side we have people who can only do one format or the other. So my cafe is trying to get to hybrid, where we could simultaneously have a group in the meeting space and a group on Zoom. And we now have 2 facilitators, which is a key ingredient for that, but we don't have the technology in place yet. Other cafes are doing other things, but it's definitely now part of the calculus when you're figuring out what your cafe is going to be. What time is the right time? So Some cafes, I would say most are morning-ish, usually not too early, 10, 10:30. Many are in the afternoon. Only do it at mealtime if you're gonna offer a meal. Maybe that's obvious. And then some cafes are offered in the evening, and or on the weekend, that can be great for working care partners and for people with younger onset dementia. Whatever time you choose, it's going to work for some and not for others. So you really, in the end, have to focus on what's sustainable for you. And ideally consider the meeting times of nearby cafes, because as the density of cafes grows in your area, you will find that some people like to go to multiple ones throughout the month. Participants. So cafes really strive to be inclusive. Generally, they're free of charge. They have to be physically accessible. They're all about being free of stigma and responsive to the different cultures and needs in the neighborhood. So I always say, ask the Mr. Rogers question: who are the people in your neighborhood? Are they coming to your cafe? If not, are there barriers that you can address and remove? And then it's also important that there be cafes for specific communities. And in the middle here, you see the flyer for SA Amigos Memory Cafe, which is the one JoAnn will be telling us about. And you see flyers for some other cafes that are in specific languages. There's a photo on the left from one of the cafes in Greater Boston that's specifically designed to include people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, along with the general population living with dementia. So there's tremendous variety out there. I would say it's a slow trend over time that there are more cafes popping up that focus on specific communities. And these cafes have been really hard hit by the pandemic. Many of them are run by organizations that are really on the front lines and just haven't had the resources to allocate to a cafe. So hopefully over time, more donor dollars and more support at every level can be channeled to making cafes available in more linguistic and cultural communities. I want to also just go back to this issue of the stage of dementia progression, because this question comes up a lot. I've gotten initial calls from many people who were thinking of starting a cafe, and they kind of assume that it should be for people with early stage dementia only. And again, this is an option, and there are some cafes that make this choice. There are some advantages to removing that limitation. Then you don't have to screen and exclude people. So if you're saying it's for early stage, you have to have some screening process. And also, disease progression is just part of the landscape with a memory cafe. So, you're trying to build a sense of community. And if it's for people at the early stage only, it means people are going to be cycling through relatively quickly, and that diminishes that sense of community. If you're concerned about serving guests with more advanced dementia, I will just put a couple things out there. Guests, participants, we use different terms. But you can require your participants who need personal care assistance to bring a care partner. I think that's a really good requirement to have in place. And I will say the Percolator did a survey a couple years ago. We had 56 respondents, and there were very few reports of any problems occurring due to dementia symptoms. I've been running a cafe for almost 10 years, and only once was there a participant who came alone, and she kind of, after a few months, was not really quite able to be there alone. The issue came up when she had to meet her transportation at the end of the cafe, and she just had trouble with that. Sometimes she thought she needed to leave early. So I called her son, we talked about it, and he had someone attend with her. But in all those years, that's literally the only time there's been an issue. I want to make a pitch also for friends. We're still in this bucket of who attends. We all know the phenomenon that, unfortunately, when someone develops dementia, their friends may drift away. They may not know how to stay connected. And attending a cafe together is a great way to stay connected. I always suggest to families and also to referral sources, think about whether there are close friends or family members who are sort of in that outer circle who might be willing to make a commitment to attend the cafe with the person living with dementia, whether it's virtual or in person. And this is a huge support. It gives a primary caregiver a scheduled break, and it keeps that relationship strong. That way the friend doesn't feel pressure to sort of generate the activity, keep conversation going. They're in an environment where all that's provided, and they're there just to facilitate the attendance and to participate and have fun right along with the person they care about. Regarding outreach, it is the most challenging step for many new cafes, and frankly, as time goes by, because again, due to disease progression, you're losing participants over time. The outreach is ongoing. It is a challenge because people don't talk openly about dementia, and mostly they're not familiar with cafes. You know, if you say to somebody, a support group, they get a picture in their mind of what that is. And they might say to themselves, well, that's not my thing. I don't go to support groups, but at least they have a concept of what it is. If you talk about a memory cafe, they may not have a concept at all. So that's why you need to sort of share some details about your cafe when you promote it, not just to let people know this is where it is, this is when it is, but to have some way of sharing more detail about what's really going to happen there. Kickoff events are great. If you can do a kickoff with an informational speaker who's going to talk about a broader topic, could be a dementia friends session, could be someone speaking about brain health, music and the impact on the brain, you know, anything of broader interest. And then you'll attract people beyond those who you expect to attend your memory cafe, but you can tack on 15 or 20 minutes to introduce your cafe, really give people some idea what it's about, what's going to happen there, and ask them to be your ambassadors. Explain to them why it's hard to get the word out, and ask everybody to take a flyer, to think about somebody that they could invite and to attend with them. And you can rely on local media to help as well to get that bigger story, more detailed story out there. And as you do get started, you can engage your participants, volunteers, co-workers, sponsors, and the broader community to all help you get the word out. I do want to mention that we have a new outreach guide on the Percolator webpage as well, which has great tips and a huge list of outreach ideas. So you can download that for free. A lot of cafes have volunteers. It's a great opportunity for volunteers to help you, but also to gain a strength-based view of dementia. I always say to prospective volunteers, it's like hosting a party. That's the mindset I want them to come in with, is a hospitality mindset. That really they're there to help it feel fun and welcoming. You know, my cafe is multi-generational. That's nice, but whatever source of volunteers you have, it's going to add an element to your cafe. Activities, there are so many options. The sky is the limit here as well. You see on screen a laundry list of things that have been done at memory cafes, but this is not a limitation. And of course, it's culturally based. I suspect JoAnn will mention Loteria, bingo, which is something that is very popular among Spanish-speaking participants in many vicinities. You know, you can do whatever it is that you have the instinct to try. And some cafes bring in guest presenters, and others it's all do it yourself. And I would say one of the nicest things is when you get to know your participants and they can actually offer some of the content. At the cafe that we run at JFNCS, we have one participant who we call our resident poet. He has this huge stockpile of poems he's written over the years, and he reads a different one at the end of every cafe. He has a specific time slot. And he always asks me at the beginning, have I read this one before? Let him know if he has, and he'll pick out one that he hasn't read. And it's special for him, and it's special for everyone. Whatever you do, I would encourage you to make it interactive. You know, I think if Frank Sinatra himself appeared at your memory cafe to give a presentation, it wouldn't be as enjoyable as it would be if people can sing along. So whatever enables people to really participate. And the other piece I'll mention is if it can be multi-sensory, that always adds. You know, if you're doing something musical and you have some images up on the wall, you know, maybe pick a theme and you have images as well as music, maybe snacks that go with that. That's wonderful, and it helps people at many different stages of dementia be able to be engaged. So I've just got a couple more categories, and then I'll be bringing this to a close so we can get to JoAnn and then get to whatever it is you have questions about and want to hone in on. But this is, of course, an important one. How do you keep the lights on? So the biggest cost of running a cafe is the coordinator's time. Rule of thumb, allocate about 15 to 20 hours per month for a cafe that meets monthly for 2 hours. Little more time in the early stages where systems are being set up and there's that need for extra outreach. And then on the lower end, as it becomes more routine. Most coordinators are paid staff, but some volunteers do run cafes. Local and regional grants can help with startup or expansion. And then for ongoing expenses, business sponsorships are helpful for many cafes, and they can help engage the business community. However, you need to set clear guidelines so that your participants are not getting the hard sell from your business sponsors. So you can just make it very clear what you will do to acknowledge their role and what you won't do. And again, we have a tip sheet on the Percolator webpage on funding your memory cafe that really hones in on this topic with a lot of detail and suggestions. So I also wanted to address the topic of meaningful involvement and this phrase, nothing about us without us, which comes originally from the disability rights movement, and it's really been taken up by advocates living with dementia. The Percolator is very fortunate to partner with Dementia Action Alliance, and we have done work together around how to meet the two goals of memory cafes. So I mentioned to you at the beginning that cafes in the US have really taken the path of leaving the disease at the door, not asking people if they have a diagnosis, making sure we follow the participants' lead in terms of whether or not they acknowledge a diagnosis or whether they want to talk about it. But the challenge is that leaves something out, because people sometimes need to talk about dementia, maybe more than they even know they do. And if they can hear from an advocate about living well with dementia, that can sometimes be revolutionary. So we've been looking at ways that we can do both, that we can share the voice of people living with dementia, that we can offer opportunities for cafe participants to really move into advocacy roles if they want to, but still protect the cafe as a space that's comfortable for people who don't identify with a diagnosis of dementia. So this guide, which you'll also find on our webpage, co-authored with Dementia Action Alliance, is a broad look at ways to help people who participate in your cafe take on more of a leadership role if they choose to. And that can be a whole bunch of different things. We also have been working with Dementia Action Alliance on something called Cafe Chats, where advocates living with dementia give brief Zoom presentations at cafes on living well with dementia. And that's been very well received. So I am encouraged to see we're finding ways to maintain our traditional safe space for people who don't relate to the diagnosis, and also introduce the opportunity to hear from people about living well with dementia, and that there doesn't have to be a contradiction between these two approaches. So finally, feedback and program improvement. So you've got your cafe going and you want to make sure that you're hearing from your participants, that you're looking for ways to improve. You probably need feedback for any funders that you have. And so there's lots of different ways that cafes do this. And on screen, you just see some of the formal approaches that various cafes take to evaluation for program improvement. Some participants use a mood scale, and they may do it pre and post every session. And on the other end of the spectrum, others solicit feedback annually. Whatever approach you take, you want to keep in mind that people have different needs in terms of communication and ability to give feedback, and maybe have a couple of different ways. And I really like the photo there. That's from a cafe in Greater Boston. And it's something they do just in the moment. They put this butcher paper up on the wall and give people the dots and read through them slowly and ask people to put dots where there are activities that they like the most. And then they chart out their next 6 months based on that. So you want to try to balance your ways of getting feedback so that you can hear from people with more advanced dementia as well as people with moderate symptoms and care partners. So that was program improvement, but there's also a need for research data to help us build the evidence base for memory cafes and really see what is their secret sauce? What are the key ingredients? What do they do for participants? And I'm so delighted that Sarah Massoud and her colleagues published this study in Frontiers of Public Health in 2021. And this is based on the cafe that JoAnn is running. So it's wonderful because it is looking at a bilingual cafe, and the study also looked at the shift from in-person to virtual during the pandemic. And so it was able to reflect on how each format worked for people and to identify these 5 key themes of how cafes benefited participants, gave them a reprieve, gave them a sense of what is still possible, gave them social connectedness, a feeling that they were included. And then this value added category includes cognitive stimulation, education about dementia, learning about resources, and the opportunity to help others. So sort of like a support group, you get to learn and benefit, but you also get to help one another, which is so vital. So I would definitely encourage you to look that up, and the full text is available for free online. So I'm going to wrap up by just showing you some resources. And again, the Percolator webpage is up top, where you can download our toolkit, join our mailing list, our Google group. We host quarterly idea exchanges. The next one is in December. And usually at those, we hear a presentation from a memory cafe, and we talk about some operational issues that are of interest to memory cafes. We have the PSA videos, a guest artist directory, which it's sort of based in Massachusetts, but a lot of the teaching artists offer virtual presentations. And I think that directory is going to expand over time more nationally. And then those various guides and how-to videos. There's some other fantastic resources out there. Some of you are familiar with Engaged and their Innovation Hub. This is a program of US Aging, and they have some guidance on cafes and cafe programs in their 2023 What Works. The Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute Best Practice Guide to Memory Cafes is great. Jutta Luckvig, who was one of the first to bring memory cafes to the US, has a book that you can get on Amazon. There's a national directory, memorycafedirectory.com. And then you can also look around at some individual or regional cafe web pages to get ideas, and there's just a few listed there. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and pass the podium over to JoAnn, and then she and I will both be glad to take questions.
Yes, this is great. Thank you so much, Beth, for this really in-depth sharing and lots of ways to get started and good steps. So remove that spotlight from you, but let's bring JoAnn forward to you. And I want to give her a little more expanded background to everyone here. JoAnn Sharman is an experienced registered nurse who has dedicated 34 years to the fields of cardiology, caregiving, and home health services. Currently, JoAnn is actively involved in the Caring for the Caregiver program with UC Health San Antonio, an initiative with a mission to enhance the quality of life for family caregivers and those under their care. In her role, JoAnn contributes to this mission by providing evidence-based education, support, and research. Through her dedication, expertise, and personal experiences, JoAnn Sharman plays a vital role in improving the well-being and quality of life for both caregivers and those they care for. We are excited to hear from you too, JoAnn. Go for it with your slides.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm located in San Antonio, Texas, and our memory cafe is called San Antonio Amigos Memory Cafe. I work for UT Health Science Center and in the School of Nursing. And our program is called Caring for the Caregiver. And Beth mentioned Dr. Sarah Massoud, who was the forerunner here in San Antonio in developing and being mentored by the Percolators organization. And we really appreciate everything you've said, Beth, because our program has utilized all your resources to develop a very effective and functional and service-oriented cafe. You know, for us, what has and is being successful is that it's important for us to get to know our community. You know, the Memory Cafe gives our staff the opportunity to really immerse ourselves in our community and understand their interests and their values. You know, we have the privilege of joining the caregiver in their journey, and we witness new memories being created for the caregiver and the person living with dementia during these events. We utilize a lot of what Beth said in that we know art therapy is one way for individuals with memory loss to stay connected with their world in a nonverbal way that enables them to interact with the people around them. In the Hispanic culture, we are very colorful. We love crocheting, sewing, as in many cultures, right? And so we create and we pay attention to the activity because some individuals may have fine motor activity issues. So we are intentional in how we decide what activities to present and to organize. And we've also taken advantage, well, not taken advantage, but we utilize the talent that is within our community. Many caregivers whose loved ones have passed on, we bring them back and they're giving the instruction. They can speak the language they understand and they can empathize. And that's what we're looking for in our cafes, right? To serve and then give the opportunity for the caregivers to serve as well. The other thing we found is that looking at the calendar, the Hispanic calendar, and seeing what we can engage and what we can present so that we can really attract, because it is challenging to attract individuals sometimes to an event, especially if they're having to manage many things for their loved one. So we utilize La Loteria, which is a great word and fine motor activity. We try to combine it with Mother's Day and even holidays, Christmas holidays. And what the studies have shown about these simple little game activities, it really helps with daily management of dementia because of its simplicity. It combined with providing the right level of mental stimulation. We've had a mixture of a bilingual and English, and we've even seen some of our recipients who only speak English really belt out some of the Spanish words that they're reading on the Loteria card. So that's a lot of fun. And games are a great way to engage both the caregiver and the loved one with dementia. And the big thing is that we know that laughter is the best part of is the best medicine for everyone involved. And as Beth mentioned, volunteers can be a huge help. They can support the person with dementia, which may provide the caregiver with an opportunity to talk and make new friends during the Memory Cafe. And we really are, we're really moving towards looking towards the different colleges that are surrounding us, because they have some very wonderful young individuals that we can help give them new eyes when it comes to the elderly. And and understand how to interact and how to support and teach them consideration for those individuals when they encounter them at the store, when they encounter them at the restaurant, in different areas. In the Hispanic culture, the kids, I remember at 9 years old, participating in the care of my great-grandmother. And it wasn't forced upon, but it was definitely, I understood it was an expectation, that participation. So we understood, so we learned very young the importance of serving our elderly and being respectful and considerate. So it really helps to gain some participation from the colleges and youth and bring them on board to help them assist. We had a Memory Cafe this past week where we used reminiscent therapy. It was wonderful, you guys. The presenter had a PowerPoint where he presented music from the 60s. He addressed the dress style, the hairstyle, popular musicians, and we had caregivers and their loved ones singing and swaying to the music. In the Hispanic culture, I've said it many times, La Familia is very important to us. We don't even consider moving them into a memory cafe. We don't even think about a long-term facility. In these two pictures, on the left-hand picture, it's a group of 4 ladies. They're siblings. The lady with the maroon blouse is the eldest, and she's the one who's living with dementia. And the 3 sisters are supportive. And what they've done is they've been intentional in educating themselves and attending many of our service programs that will enable them to develop their confidence in delivering care, being advocates, and the confidence to take her to different locations so that they can create new memories. And then on the right, we have a son and a mom. Thomas has invested a great amount of time in himself so that he can support his mama. And they enjoy these memory cafes, and they come and they just enjoy and create new memories. But the big thing that Thomas has learned through all of these activities is how to develop a self-care plan and not feel bad about doing that. And understand the importance of reducing the stress level so that he doesn't burn out and he can deliver compassionate and patient care. But reminiscent therapy is a wonderful tool, because what we're finding in our cafes is that we have a lot of ladies that participate, and the men are kind of left out. So some of the themes really are they kind of favor the female population. And with this reminiscent therapy, our presenter also talks about baseball. And I know baseball isn't as big of a deal as football and basketball now, but for people who are in their 60s and 70s, they grew up around that sport. And it's great to see the men recall, join in, and contribute, whether it's the person living with dementia or their caregivers. The last thing, my presentation is going to be a little short, but the last thing I want to share with you is, and I want to leave you with the mental picture. You know, the caregivers enter a journey and they start at one end of the bridge. And as they cross over, they may encounter a forest, a mountains, or deserts. And these journeys may describe the different stages of dementia. As in many cultures, the Hispanic culture teaches the kids to care for their elders at home. And what happens with our caregivers, and I personally am a caregiver as well, and what happened, and I experienced this, I encountered different companions in my journey. The first companion I encountered was grief, anticipatory grief. And what we're hoping to do in our program, in the memory cafes and educational different services that we provide, is that they use this companion to encourage them to learn about the disease, to find support, and then prepare for the future. The second companion that they may encounter is sorrow. And we're hoping to create new memories so that they may learn to endure the sorrow. The third companion that they may encounter is joy. And hopefully they will learn to embrace joy, hold on to joy's hand as they go.
Recording in progress.
The fourth companion that they may encounter, and this is the one that needs to be managed very carefully because it can get 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide. And that companion is guilt. Here's where we have to learn, and we help our caregivers, whether it be at a memory cafe or give them opportunities to talk to each other. So as they share and as they address this companion, they will learn how to face their emotions. They will learn how to forgive themselves. And the goal is not perfection, but rather compassionate and patient care, not only for their loved ones, but for themselves. The culture, the Hispanic culture, puts a lot, and I'm sure all cultures do, but it puts a lot on the children. And some of this guilt may be self-imposed and expectations that they may not be able to always meet the needs. And hopefully through these events, the engagement, reducing isolation, as well as educational, we can help them face this companion, reduce it down to 3 feet tall, and that way they can continue to hold on to joy's hand. Well, that's my presentation. And we are at UT Health here at San Antonio, caring for the caregiver. And I thank you so much for this time. And Beth, thank you for your content. I learned so much, and I will definitely be reaching out to your website for more support. Thank you.
Super. Yeah, thank you so much, JoAnn. Go ahead and stop your share. Wonderful. So we're in our time where we can take questions from you. I think we're all fitting on one screen here. So if you want to raise a hand or put something in the chat, I'll be looking at the chat and can direct the questions to our guest speakers here. I'll put that spotlight on Beth also so that you guys can always find them as they're speaking to you. So go for it. Either raising a hand physically or using that reactions tool in your toolbar to find the raised hand. I'll look for all of that. And you can voice questions to our two speakers. Yeah, go for it.
Well, mine's not really a question. I just thought that was amazing. And my whole goal for this conference was to find something new and different and sort of all-inclusive for my senior community center on Bainbridge Island. And I mean, between my notes and what I'm going to take off your website, I mean, I'm golden. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to hear, Sue. And, you know, questions will come up along the way. So I have to say, when I started learning about memory cafes back in 2012, 2013, I was amazed at the spirit of sharing And I learned so much from people who already had them up and running. And that's where the Percolator comes from, is just continuing that. And you will find that if you post a question on the Percolator Google group, or, reach out to somebody, any of us, you will get a lot of great feedback. So know that you're not alone.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go with Jamie, who has hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Jamie. I work at a senior center here in the south end of Seattle, and we are hoping to start a memory cafe. So really excited to get all this information. And I had a question because we used to have a memory cafe in the neighborhood at a actual cafe, a little pizza joint. And I really loved that atmosphere, but I'm just a little bit overwhelmed with the logistics and thinking it would be much easier just to kind of start here at the center. But I'm just wondering if you've heard of any memory cafes that might kind of travel. I could see a lot of issues with that as far as kind of that changing environment. But if because I just love the idea of just kind of bringing this program into the community, into restaurants, into cafes. Thank you.
There are traveling cafes. Usually they have a few specific settings they rotate among. Sort of an easier version of this is there's a library network in Wisconsin that rotates among the branches. So it's meets 1 month in one branch and the next month in another, but they're all libraries. So they have sort of common features. But what you're describing would be a little more challenging in that, the pizza place might have very different parking and kind of accommodations than a different setting. I think that there's pros and cons. I think that it's always easier to keep things simple, especially for people living with dementia. So being in one setting makes it more simple. People know what to expect. They know the logistics. On the other hand, it's limiting in that you're always in the same neighborhood and you don't get to experience different environments. So I think you just have to balance those pros and cons and maybe just start with 2 locations, see how that goes, and, potentially add a third. And I think what is most important is just as you go, you get feedback from your participants, because not every group is the same. And, I know cafes that do field trips, and so they're going out to different localities, and that works really well for that group of people. Good question. And I see in the chat, I just don't want to miss Shannon's question about regional grant assistance. So it is so location specific. Some communities have family foundations, some have regional funders, some have businesses that have foundations, or there can be community bank foundations. So there isn't one pat answer, but if you download that tip sheet on funding your cafe and I'll just put the Percolator webpage in the chat, it has a really good list of types of places to look, and then you can see what fits for your community. Anything you want to add, JoAnn, on either of those questions?
Thanks. We do have a moving cafe, and what we find for our Hispanic cafes, we have to go into their community. And so I am looking at churches that have very good halls. I got to confess to you, I'm a community nurse, so I start assessing the minute I get off the car. I look at how easy it is for them to get in and out, and I make sure that the whoever the business is, that they have a comfortable, dedicated space that I can bring our participants to, because issues, Beth is right, that sensory overload can be difficult for some of our participants. And then I found our garden center, San Antonio Botanical Garden. They've opened their door to us. And I think we're finding businesses that are really leaning into this topic because they have been touched and they're willing to open the doors and learn and serve and provide. So I love the idea of moving our cafe around. Again, because of the mobility issues or even transportation issues, we take it into the community and revive some of the things that are going on in their location. That's how we do it.
Right. Super. We have 2 questions. I know Denny has a question and Chloe. Chloe, go with you and then we'll go with Denny after that. About 4 minutes left here together as a group.
Okay. My question has to do with initial startup. Did you send maybe a survey or any kind of inquiry to your current participants in your program? If you have a senior center, I operate from a senior center. And so I think it would be beneficial to identify those that might be interested. I was wondering if there was anything like that on the Percolator. I haven't gotten to do a deep dive. So that was kind of where I was at.
The toolkit doesn't include a template for an initial survey, but I think it's a great idea. I was just on a meeting yesterday with a group of people looking at starting a cafe. This is in a rural part of Arizona, and they were talking about that exact thing. And that they wanted to get a sense of whether people wanted a support group, a memory cafe, to sort of lay out a few options, something that was more about respite care. So I think it's a fantastic idea because you don't know until you ask.
Yeah.
And every group's different.
Definitely think there's a need for it. I just want to make sure that we tailor it to the community, like whether it's more caregiver focused or, yeah.
I think the one piece of advice I would give is make sure you provide enough information about what a memory cafe is.
Yes.
That they get a clear picture of that.
I was thinking I'm going to do like a lunch and learn session and allow them the opportunity to kind of bring their questions. Okay.
Do you have thoughts about that, JoAnn?
From ours, I think we've developed our communities through our research. We're on a campus, we're on a campus. So we did our research. We had research, and then from there build up our caregiver participation. So I really don't have a contribution on that one, but I think I love the idea of that survey, that simple surveys that will give them a voice and give them ownership of the event, right? I think that is a great idea.
Super. We certainly want to touch on Denny's question, waiting patiently. So it sounds like there can be issues where maybe someone who has dementia doesn't want to be with others in a group that are more progressed than them. I'm just paraphrasing for you, Denny. How have you handled that in a situation or encouraged someone to participate when you've seen that or understood that, Beth or JoAnn?
JoAnn, do you want to weigh in on that?
We have participants that run the gamut of the dementia scale stages, and we haven't run into. I have not addressed that. I'll be honest with you. Nobody has voiced it, and we try very hard to talk to each caregiver as well as and get their perspective. But I think even our program needs to be more intentional in doing the surveys and understanding that perspective. But I can see that fear and I can see that concern from someone who's living with dementia and looking forward, right? I can totally see that concern and not wanting to participate. In our program, we haven't run into that. Everybody, we just haven't. So I don't have any recommendations. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. This person was my husband's buddy. They both had dementia. My husband progressed a lot faster. Now this man is in that more challenged stage, and the Memory Cafe stopped because he was the driver. So I'm actually meeting with him and his support group this afternoon to say, hey, I think it'd be a great idea to start. But he's saying, I think he's really saying, I don't want people to see me, but he's saying, I don't want to see people who are drooling on themselves. That's how he says it. And it's, but you know, and there was a point where he had to turn my husband back over because he said he's too much for me. So there are real dynamics there. I'm trying to figure out how to be respectful, but I love the fact that, and I know that the leading needs to come with that kind of input.
Vinny, thank you for sharing your experience and this very important question. And just briefly, I'll say one way to help is to make sure the content is provided in a very adult and respectful manner. And so the goal would be for, if there are any activities provided, that they be done in such a way that people can participate no matter what their cognitive needs, but the context is a very adult one. So just for example, you know, whenever we do art making, we always show some slides of well-known artists, like we look to Matisse when we're doing collage, you know, so the actual art making is something people can participate in from many different cognitive places, but we connect it with a sophisticated tradition, so people don't feel they're being spoken down to. And, you know, people can have internalized stigma, and I think it's very, very tough for people living with dementia in this society not to feel ashamed because of disability. That's true for disability in general. And all we can do is try to support them. And maybe your friend, if he thinks of his role as being a community leader and he's trying to help provide an inclusive space for others, you know, he's seeing himself more as a giver. And sometimes that helps. And in real life, we're all givers and receivers all the time.
Great. I appreciate that. Okay.
Super. Thank you so much, everyone. I know this was a really impactful and packed hour. So thanks both to Beth and JoAnn for their expertise and their experiences in sharing with us.